Okay, so sorry, my name's Cassandra Goodmansen. I have a background in ecology and natural resources. I was volunteering for a Native American tribe when I was introduced to permaculture. And through that, I really found harmony between human systems and the environment. And so I'm here today to talk about this subject that I find to be probably one of the most important subjects because it solves so many of the world's problems through a garden. So let me share my screen. All right, so permaculture. Obeying nature's laws and God's laws. I wanted to tie this into what President Nelson said at a BYU talk, the love and laws of God. So he had an experience when he said, I came to see the power of divine law that came during my career as a medical doctor and a scientific researcher. After graduating from medical school, I pursued an advanced education in surgery. At that time, there was no such thing as heart surgery. Then I teamed up with another researcher in the daunting task of making an artificial lung and heart machine. We knew that such an apparatus could possibly maintain the body's circulation while repairs may be done to the heart. But during that year, there was much we did not know. Then one day, two truths articulated in the Doctrine and Covenants spoke to my inquiring mind. These truths were first, that all blessings are predicated on the obedience of law, and second, that every kingdom there is a law given. Well, for this I reasoned that if every kingdom had a law, there must be laws governing the beating heart. I was determined to discover these laws and obey them, and by doing so, blessings would come and the lives would be saved. We learned that if we added potassium chloride to blood flowing in the coronary valve arteries, thereby altering the normal sodium-potassium ratio, the heart would stop beating instantly. Then, when we nourished the heart with blood that had a normal sodium-potassium ratio, the heart would spring back to its normal beating pattern. Literally, we can turn the heart off as long enough to repair it, then turn it back on again. Decades later, when I explained this to a group of medical students, one prominent professor asked, but what if it doesn't work? My answer, it always works, because it is based on divine law. Divine law is incontrovertible. The same can be said of the law of gravity and the laws of foil and lift that allow airplanes to fly. Each is an absolute truth. Doctors or pilots do not have the power to change these laws, but their understanding of them safeguards their lives. My dear brothers and sisters, divine laws are God's gift to his children, just as our families' rules kept our children safe as they grew to adulthood, just as divine laws governing the heart and flight of airplanes keep you safe on operating table or while traveling. Abiding by God's laws will keep you safe in the progress towards eternal exaltation. Let me say it succinctly as I can. As you abide God's laws, you are progressing towards exaltation. I just wanted to include that because there are laws to all of his kingdoms, and how plants and animals interact and where they live and grow also follows these rules, God's divine law. So permaculture was created by Bill Mollison, the term permaculture, meaning permanent agriculture, in 1978. He was an ecologist that was raised in Tanzania, but he was concerned with the destruction he saw humans were creating. So after studying natural systems and seeing how indigenous people lived, he was convinced he could create a system that used ecology to provide for people's needs without destroying the environment. And we've had several studies that show that early humans, whether it's the Amazon rainforest or the Native Americans here in North America, that all of these had very complex, massaging of the ecology to make them food forests, make them more sustainable for human life. These areas, they weren't just simple hunter-gatherers. That very simplifies their existence, and they've spent many years cultivating and making the land abundant for their people. It wasn't until birth of modern agriculture in the breadbasket of the world where we started cultivating land. But that only leads to wastelands. I mean, these pyramids, when the Egyptians were living here, they didn't put their, the place of the gods in a wasteland. They put it in the most abundant, beautiful place they had available, but it's all gone. We have destroyed that environment so much that it has not come back. But this boom and bust is not just of one civilization, but it has occurred many times over, where humans have used up the resources to become these great societies, and then they crash. And you could tell that a great part of their destruction was due to the destruction of their local ecology, because their local ecology didn't come back even thousands of years later, due to just how much destruction, like monocultures. We think of famines and pestilence, and this is all because of monoculture societies. But for them, it took them thousands of years before they desolated their land. But with us, with poisons and erosion, big machines, we are not going to take thousands of years to become a wasteland. It is already happening. Many talk about climate change, and while that is a very important thing, it's not the only problem, and many of our problems come from the agricultural sector because of how we are treating the land. The land holds so much of the carbon of everything, of life, and we are destroying it. In order to cultivate land for crops, we have to actively destroy the ecology that was already there in order to grow monoculture crops. And so, we've tried to do things called like sustainable agriculture or sustainable cities even, but it's not enough. Sustainable ag seeks to stop degradation of soils, reduce farming imports, and use practices like no-till and cover crop. But just stopping the downward spiral is not enough. The past degradation will not be repaired in this system. It still leaves human and wildlife imbalances. If we look at how degraded our soils already are, we can see that soil degradation is just about everywhere on the planet. There's some colder regions that haven't been cultivated as heavily as other regions. But we're at a point where just being sustainable, we've already gone down to the point where even if we stopped, continued going downwards, if we don't go back up, we still can't sustain life. And that's where permaculture comes in, because permaculture is beyond sustainability. Permaculture is regenerative, as it provides human food while still being stewards of wildlife, soils, and the whole earth. It actively improves the environment instead of degrading it by listening to nature's laws and putting in patterns that God has put in place. So the three ethics of permaculture is earth care, people care, and fair share. And these are supported by 12 principles: to observe and interact with your environment, to catch and store energy, to obtain a yield, to apply self-regulation and feedback and accept feedback. Basically, be humble, to use and value resources, to produce no waste, design from patterns to details, integrate rather than separate, use small and slow solutions like line upon line, precept upon precept, use and value diversity, and use edges and value the marginal, and creatively use and respond to change. By using these ethics and principles, we can restore the planet. So if we look at patterns in nature, we can see huge herds of herbivores, whether it's, the Arctic tundra or the, savannas in Africa. Why in such, with fewer animals and even in larger spaces, when humans get involved, these animals destroy the planet. But the question is why? It's because we don't act like normal predators. Normal predators keep these large groups into tight, large balls, and they eat off the weak and the slow ones. And that keeps the group healthy, and that keeps the group moving in the landscape. So you can have these huge herds, but they're continuously moving through the landscape. And so one part of permaculture, which is called holistic management or managed grazing, is you treat your animals and large bovines kind of like buffalo, where you keep them in a tight herd and you move them along the landscape and keep them contained in small managed paddocks. That's similar to keeping them all together in a pack, and you move them across the landscape. And these aren't permanent fences, so you have all this open space to share with wildlife while they're doing, more even grazing. Because out here, when they are just left in continuous grazing, they will automatically go to the best food and the best spots and just eat that to the ground and just destroy them, while letting the other grasses and like other weeds and non-valuable items grow and produce more. And so by letting them just choose whatever they want to eat on the landscape, they're going to overgraze what's the best and leave the worst to take over the rest. And so by having these tight managed grazing, you're able to have a more even movement. I have actually met someone who restored his uncle's degraded and basically broke ranch, and he was able to restore the landscape using these methods. And for him, it was really that you can have greater yields per acre than conventional ag. We can feed the world and heal it too, but it takes a lot of good management and smart people. He says this, in the beginning of the year when the grass is new and small, he has to move his herd sometimes 3 times a day just to get them moving to not overgraze their area, which takes a lot of work. But as the year progresses and as those other paddocks that haven't been touched at all grow, he can move them slower and slower, and it's much easier. And the grass is so much better for all the animals. But when it comes to what we normally would do in permaculture, it incorporates a lot of looking at forests, looking at nature, looking at the different layers. So if you look at a natural forest system, I'm in a temperate zone. And so for me, you have the canopy or the tall tree layer, the subcanopy and the larger shrub layer. You have the regular shrub layer, the herbaceous layer, ground cover. You have the underground, the root layer, which is also very important. Vertical climbers of vines, the aquatic systems, and fungi. These are all very important things, and understanding how each layer works and how we can incorporate edible foods into these different ecosystems. We can produce a great amount of food into areas that would normally, not have as much to offer us. But by knowing the layers and knowing how we can use them to our advantage, really helps in being able to live in abundance while still preserving ecology, giving birds places to live, giving frogs places to jump around. One technique that is used in permaculture is called a swale. And they're kind of like a little stream, but they go the opposite direction. So they go, you think of a stream going downhill, and these go across the landscape that go on contours. So they go at the same altitude, or latitude, I should say. And this is what it looks like. They have beautiful landscapes where you can see the shape and use every edge and the trees in these landscapes. And you can use the different layers, the tree layers, the shrub layers, all these different types of edges that bring abundance and different types of plants that you can have. So, I mean, if something happened to one of your crops, you have so many others that you can use to feed your family and to feed the world if we farm this way. And these farms are beautiful. They have integrated rather than segregated. So you integrate flowers, brassicas with roots, with different plants that you can then harvest, and the pests is much less, because if you think of a beacon of light, if you have all these different beacons of light shining brighter and brighter, that's like pests. When you think of a monoculture crop, it's like, they can't not see it. Versus if you have all these different types of vegetables, all these different types of plants together, it mixes different colors, different signals to insects, and they have a much harder time finding it. And even when they find it, there's only one plant on either side that they could spread, and it's easy to cut the chain. So keeping pests down is helpful, especially if you integrate things like I don't know if you can see behind the woman, she has a duck behind her. Ducks are wonderful things to integrate into gardens because they're very good at eating slugs and other pests from your garden without just, chickens can kind of peck holes and tend to eat the foliage, but ducks do not do so. And they also, fertilize as they go along. And they also have wonderfully large eggs that are very rich and actually, bakers love using duck eggs because they make such wonderful pastries. And then when it comes to plants, you can have plants that what we call companion planting, or plants that support each other in some way. So some of you may be familiar with the three sisters that Native Americans used to use. So the corn grows nice and tall and straight, which it uses as climbing support for beans. And the beans are nitrogen fixers. So they have a symbiotic relationship with bacteria that put nitrogen back in the soil. Corn loves nitrogen, so it grows even taller for the beans. And then they have squashes that prickly leaves protect them from some raccoons, and it shades the ground and keeps a lot of moisture in the ground. And so having all these together help the system stay strong, and they support each other and give each other things that they need. So if you have plants that work well with each other and support each other, it helps make them grow even better. You don't need a big space. Food forests can make abundant food in a small space. Whenever I watch this guy, his name's James Prigioni, he's on YouTube, it just seems like his yard is 10 times bigger than it really is because he has so much abundance. He's got the overstory, the understory, the bushes, so many things where he's producing so much food all year round. Well, I mean, not so much in the winter, but, he has abundance, and it's wonderful. And it's definitely something that anyone can do. It takes a lot of knowledge to know what plants go with what, but we live in a very connected world where we can get information. Many people really love to learn about guilds and what plants go with what, but it's important to know that we step back and think, what makes sense for my local environment? What grows here where I live? Because that's the whole point of permaculture, is to find what your region excels at, find what should grow here, and work with nature. Don't just say, oh, I love papayas, so I'm going to grow papayas, even though it's winter and I can get a greenhouse and I can put heat lamps or whatever. You know, if you work with nature, what naturally occurs in your area, it's a wonderful thing. You learn so much more about different foods you can do just by learning about where you're living. So permaculture is about finding connections with everything, with trees, with chickens. You do things having these understanding of what things need. What does it produce? What can I use? And combining those things. So if you think of a chicken, it produces fertilizer, it produces heat. It's a pest control solution. You know, there's different connections that can be made of what can be useful for a chicken. A tree can be useful for a chicken because it has perches. You know, one thing that people don't think of is like heat generation. So if you think about a greenhouse, you know, a chicken coop and a greenhouse are both things that need to happen. And so you can have an integrate rather than segregate. So you can have a chicken coop that's also a greenhouse where the carbon dioxide that's produced by the chickens can feed the plants, and the warmth from the chicken can help keep the plants warm at night. And, you know, the plants can provide food and other things for the chickens. But there's a lot of things that go into that. Bill Mollison's very technical in his designs, which is very helpful. You have to think about, where's the sun angle? In the summertime, you know, I don't want it to get too hot, so we have to make sure it's the angle is so that it's shaded during the hot part of the day. But during the winter, we want to have as much heat as possible. There's lots of things that go into these designs. Some people start losing people around here where they don't think that they can think up these things, but that's not the point. The point isn't to think up complex solutions. We live in a connected world. You know, some people are the designers, the engineers, other people are the builders and the doers. There's always a piece and always a something that everyone can contribute to permaculture. We just have to think of the simple, think of what we can do. Realizing that when we live in a permaculture society, we're living in the way that listens and obeys the laws of nature, even if we're not the biggest inventor or, you know, making complex systems, just growing something. You know, I've had a really rough time this summer, and I haven't been able to make a garden. And it was killing me, especially studying permaculture. All I want to do is grow a garden. So I had to think, what can I do? I remembered listening to the general conference about the 1% improvement. I'm like, okay, I can't have a garden. I can't do all the things I want to do. But what resources do I have? What's one thing I can do to benefit my family? And so I looked around and I'm like, okay, I have windows. I have sunny windows. I can grow basil. Basil was one of those plants that was one of those, like, once you have fresh basil and you start cooking with fresh foods, it really changes your life. And so just having basil in my window was something that I could do to reconnect with that part of me, of growing something, of making something, using the resources that I have. One such example of permaculture that shows that it can be done anywhere in the world was the Greening the Desert project. This was done just miles away from where Jesus was crucified, near the Dead Sea, in one of the saltiest, most arid regions on earth. But by using permaculture principles based on divine laws and the patterns God has made, this land was able to be resurrected. This land was able to create food and a sustainable system for these people. And it's amazing. You can use permaculture principles using the divine patterns that God has sent out. It makes systems sustaining. This project, they only had so much funding. There's a lot of stuff tied up with external aid. And so after this project was completed, they didn't have any external aid to keep it going. But because permaculture is based on perennial systems, because it's an ecosystem that lives and evolves in itself, it was self-sustaining. It just keeps growing and it keeps thriving because of the fact that once that ecosystem is established, it can feed people for decades because it is a living system. And that can be part of the reason why it can have issues with permaculture, is because it takes time and skill to develop. A lot of people just want to go out and make food like instantly, that year, that time. But having patience, being able to listen to the land, being able to listen to your environment, know what place you're at, know what your land is saying. That, as permaculturalists, you go onto a piece of land and you don't touch it for an entire year. You just have to observe every season, see where the water goes on a property, see where the snow lands. It takes patience, and that is really hard in our society because our society is instant. They want things now. They want someone just to come and do it for them and it'll be great. But an ecosystem takes tweaking. It takes years to develop, but it's forgiving. It's much easier than fixing a heart in a surgery table. You can make mistakes and you can fix them. And that's the beautiful thing with permaculture, is even though you can make mistakes and you can fix them over time. Another thing that makes it so we don't have permaculture everywhere in the world is the fact that our diets are horrible. Back in the 70s, they created this monstrosity of a food pyramid where it has, grains and breads at the bottom, where it doesn't make sense. In our, growing up in civilization, we did not spend thousands of years making, having grains as our base diet. We moved around the landscape. We ate tubers. We, hunted wild animals. We didn't, it was on the long-term effects of human history. It's only fairly recently that we started cultivating. And so if you think about it in long-term perspectives, this is not normal. But now we have a society that is addicted to carbs and sugars, which they have done research showing that sugar is as addictive as cocaine. And it's very hard to break that diet. I mean, carbs are a wonderful source of energy, that quick fix, that quick thing that helps our body. It's exactly what our body wants. And it's the most efficient way to get energy to the body. But that's like eating, chocolate cake constantly. We need minerals. We need all these vitamins and minerals that are in fruits and vegetables that we don't get in our modern society. Even, this new USDA plate, if you think about, this is half of every single meal, fruits and vegetables, is, a quarter of it protein and dairy. We have to think about, this is what they have said what our diet should be, but how well are we actually doing it? And so they've done a lot more research now, and they've reconstructed the pyramid, being like, this is what's important for our gut health. Our gut is it's its own ecosystem in our bodies, and we don't even know what all grows there, but we know that it's vitally important for our life. And so having a healthy gut is what's really important. And so we really need to live off the land, off of fruits and vegetables and some meats, and then a teeny tiny bit of energy producing materials. Oops. So one thing that's another problem for permaculture is just lost knowledge. We don't know what grows anymore. We just see what's in the supermarket and expect that's the only food there is. But we need to know what food is in season, what is actually grown locally, what crops are native, what wild foods were traditionally foraged. You have to be careful with those because we have lost knowledge. And so unless you're 100% sure of what you're eating, you need to not, just go out and eat whatever. But, there's lots of good foods. The pawpaw, for example, I've never heard of it. I've met people who have lived here in Pennsylvania their whole life and they don't know what a pawpaw is, but it's the largest fruit native to North America. And it's kind of like between a mango and a banana, and it's a wonderful food, but it bruises easily and is only available for a short time, which is why it's not at the grocery store. So just knowing what's in your environment is so important. We've lost skills of, what do I even do with this food? How do I plant it? What does it need? How do I even harvest it or cook it or prepare it? So much knowledge that we have lost. But it's wonderful to know and to learn about what really grows and how to treat your environment. Another issue that there is in this world is actually food shaming, where foraging is uncivilized, even more than just icky foods like insects and rats and things, but also tubers and wild vegetables. Even grains that grow naturally in an area and that are abundant and nutritious are looked down upon. This is, definitely not just the United States, but this is all over the world. This is why there's so much hunger and so much poverty in the world, is just because people are trying to force nature to use what they don't have. They're not using what grows abundantly and nutritionally in their environment. They're looking at other places and being like, oh, I want what they have. And so even well-meaning NGOs accidentally pressure cultures where they'll go and be like, hey, these are the nutrition that you need to have a healthy baby. And they'll look at the list of foods and they'll see things like apples and grapes, and they don't have those things. Instead of, these NGOs going out and finding out what traditional foods have these nutritions, just the fact that it's honestly on accident, we don't really think about what they have there. And that has led, this years ago, it's led to a lot of people forgetting, their traditional foods. And so many people could use ancient knowledge that kept them in tune with the landscape. So in Africa, there was one project called the Never Ending Food Project, because like so much of Africa now, their fields are abandoned in April or May after they harvest the corn that they've now been given to plant. And once the corn is gone and they've sold all the corn, all of this land is just left open, and it leads to soil degradation, and there's no food for anyone to eat. Versus these permaculture places where they can make abundant food year round using more traditional foods, integrating animals and systems that use what Africa was known for. There's a reason why so many people and the basket of humanity came from Africa. It's because there's abundance there. If we know what to look for, if we know what is edible, we can bring abundance back into the world. Food is beautiful. Food is like people, different cultures, different elements of the world. But at the same time, I worry about showing people this slide because people want to go and buy exotic foods. But that's not the point of permaculture. I mean, when you go out to the supermarket and get, mangoes or whatever, there was quite a lot of resources that went to package and transport that. Plus, they're picked when they're not ripe and their flavor is poor. I remember talking to someone who, he went on his mission. I can't remember where, but I think it's like Asia or something where mangoes are from. And they're like, oh, have you had a mango? He's like, oh, yeah, I've had in the States before. And he just laughed at him. They're like, oh, those mangoes are like what we feed the animals. Let's come have a real mango. Because when you grow food and let it ripen and pick it at the right time, it's so much better. Not just the flavor, but there's just some connection that you have with food that you can pick. And I mean, when you go to the grocery store, only varieties that keep well or that you can pick super early and will still ripen on their own, those sort of qualities make it so they go to the grocery store. But there's so much more food in the world than just what fits that grocery store credential. So I'm encouraging people to go and grow. Although permaculture is really, the heart of it is really in perennial systems that grow more abundantly year after year. Just getting started, even if it's a tomato, even if it's something you have to plant every year, just getting into the dirt, it actually is really healthy for you. The more research that they do on your gut microbe, the more they have found that just interacting with the soil really helps heal your gut and gives you these microbes that are wonderful for you. So even when you damage your gut, a lot of people thought you should eat yogurt, but that's doing the monoculture thing where they have only a few strands of bacteria. But you really need to integrate this huge ecosystem that they have found really gets restored if you eat fermented foods or play in the soil. And so having a connection with the soil is not just good for giving your family food, it's good for your soul, really. So I'm ending with saying that permaculture, it builds resilience, food security, and it supports native ecology systems. The more locally grown food you have, it minimizes transport and packaging, it increases local food security, and it emphasizes native plants, which are great for pollinators and wildlife. The diversity of plants equals a diversity in vitamins and minerals. A lot of people think we know everything about how the body works and you can just take these multivitamins every day and be good, but we really don't know everything that the body needs, but the plants do. And by diversifying our diet, we are diversifying our ability to get everything we need to be a really healthy person. So in the end, I just want to say that following these nature's laws is listening to what God is telling us if we listen to nature. One thing that was said during my permaculture class is when a plant gives you a seed, she's giving you her babies. And if you take care of those babies will take care of you. And so when we can show God's love, we can show God that we love him by learning to cherish the beauty and the resources he has provided. So I just wanted to end there. And I hope you've learned a lot. And I hope you guys have gained a wonderful dip into the permaculture life that we should all be living. Thank you.